USA Warrior Stories is a not-for-profit organization designed to record, archive, and share videos of veteran stories, to help veterans make a connection with one another and to help us all better understand their sacrifices for our freedoms.
I was born and raised in Seattle. Went to college in Washington State University in Eastern Washington. In college, I was in ROTC. Everybody that went to a land-grant college throughout the country had to go through ROTC. You either had to be in ROTC or the marching band, and I had no musical background, so I was in from 60 to 64 at Washington State, and graduated, got a commission, and went into the Army, into the Transportation Corps.
In both our military and civilian life, our nation needs capable, well-trained leaders. One of the primary sources of leaders for our Army is the ROTC, the Reserve Officers Training Corps.
Several of the ROTC instructors had been to Vietnam, and there were some special forces, they were advisors. There was a military presence from the end of Eisenhower, which is pretty small, and then it was a little bigger during the Kennedy administration. And I remember when Kennedy was assassinated, that was the day that we were doing drills. I was leaving that, a co-ed was going by and she said, "Kennedy has just been shot." I was in my uniform and I went over to the administration building where I knew there was a TV, and there it was, and you could see the reporting coming on, and then somebody came and announced that he had just died. I worked on the campus radio station, and I did the news program for that Friday evening. So I was in the newsroom getting all of the material from AP, Associated Press, and from United Press International coming off the wires and putting together that news show. One of the most traumatic events. That day Johnson became president, and he made some decisions that led to a widening of the war. I was assigned to the 4th Transportation Command at Fort Eustis. Around that time, the Gulf of Tonkin resolution was passed, and I was set to go to Korea, but my roommate, Bob, was on orders. He was in a transportation unit, which was also at Fort Eustis, and his unit was assigned to go to Vietnam as one of the very first units. And then soon after, the boat unit from Cam Ranh Bay, it was the 1097th Boat Company. It was landing craft mediums, LCMs. And my commanding officer came and asked me if I would be interested in going, if I would volunteer to go. There was one of the lieutenants, the platoon leaders in that company, his father had a heart attack, and so he went home. He was excused, and so the CO came to me and asked if I would volunteer. I went home that evening, asked if I could think about it overnight, and I remember growing up, and there are all of these pictures that I'd see on TV of the U.S. Army in Korea during the war and the wintertime. And it really was, it sucked. I hate the cold. That influenced me a little bit. So I decided I would go to Vietnam. I was assigned to the 1097th Boat Company, and we went on a C-124. And it's a 2-story airplane that opens up at the front, and we took off from Langley Air Force Base in Virginia. We stopped in Texas to refuel. Then we got to Travis Air Force Base. We refueled there, and then went down the runway, stopped, came back, diddled around with something, took off, flew for about 10 or 15 minutes, came back to Travis, and then he said, "Well, we're not going to be able to get this part until we go to Hawaii." So we got back in the plane, flew to Hawaii so they could pick up this part for the plane. It's the only time I've ever been to Hawaii. We got a day off. A couple of us officers figured, hey, this is going to be our last night in the States. So let's go get the best possible meal we could get. So there were, I think, 3 or 4 of us, and we went to the Royal Hawaiian Hotel. Now, all we had was our combat material. Down at the very bottom of my duffel bag, I had, we had a pair of civilian clothes. Like, I had a pair of khakis and some kind of a short sleeve shirt. That was it. So we put this stuff on, went to the Royal Hawaiian Hotel to get this great meal, and they would not let us in. We did not meet the dress code. They said, sorry. So we found a steakhouse in downtown Honolulu, had a very nice meal, settled in the next morning, back in the plane, flew over to Wake Island, refueled, flew from there to Guam, flew to the Philippines, and there was all the talk, all the sergeants who had been around for years talked very knowingly about when we got to the Philippines, we were going to pick up our boats. We'd probably spend several weeks, maybe a month there, getting our boats ready to go over to Vietnam. So we got to the Philippines, got off the plane, got back on the plane, and the next stop was Nha Trang in Vietnam. There was nothing there. There was nothing at Cam Ranh Bay when we first got there except for a French Foreign Legion base. These are some Korean Marines, and this was at the French Foreign Legion base. That was the thing there. It was pretty vacant, and it was being used as the headquarters for the Vietnamese junk navy. When I first got there, there was no security at Cam Ranh Bay. We were pulling our own security. The first thing we did was dug some foxholes and set up our security lines and lines of fire. And the Big Red 1, the 1st Infantry Division, was supposed to have been there before we got there to take care of that security aspect of this. But their ship broke down at sea. And so we were there like a few weeks before they got there. And when they came in, and they were coming ashore like they were coming ashore during World War II. We were just kind of laughing at them because it was perfectly safe. But there were some news media there taking their pictures coming ashore. But they did see some tough action. So we were kind of smiling at it, but we knew we didn't want to be where they were going. And when I first got there was like maybe 1 or 2 ships that were anchored in the bay. At the high point, there could be up to 20 ships, cargo ships, tankers, other. We didn't have anything to do with the tankers, but for all of the cargo ships, almost all of their cargo came onto our boats. And it was a 24-hour operation that we were working. In this issue of Life magazine, this is in February of '66, there's a big story here on Vietnam. So that's me in that Jeep.
Oh.
And you can see, none of this was here when I first got there. And I think there's another picture. Every day there would be a blast on this hill here, and making cement. Mm-hmm. And then these were these portable warehouses, inflatable warehouses that were set up. So my friend Bob and I were going to go to Saigon for an overnight trip. And to go, we would just go down to there's a small airstrip that was there before, just about 600 feet, only very small propeller planes and helicopters would be going and coming from there. And there was a shack there about as big as, not even as big as the space that we're sitting in right here. And it was just a shack by the landing strip. And so we went over there and told the guy that we wanted to go to Saigon. And so he looked up, he saw a helicopter flying, and he'd call it up, and he'd tell, we have a couple guys here who are going to Saigon, where are you going? And he'd say, well, that's where we're headed. and it was just flying by. So he came down, picked us up, and that's how casual it was.
Wow.
I did that a bunch. And we fly over to Saigon, and then we went out that night to a French-Vietnamese restaurant in Saigon. And it was, I remember having a Chateaubriand, this great steak, and there was a woman singing what sounded like lead roses for a brew rady. That's me and my friend Bob in Hong Kong at a top of there's a restaurant at the top of a hotel. And we had those suits made for us while we were in Hong Kong.
I was going to ask you, yeah, I bet you did, yeah.
Yeah. I had 2 jobs while I was there. My first job was with the boat platoon. And after I was there for around 3 or 4 months or so, I was asked by if I would like to become like the public information officer and protocol officer for Cam Ranh Bay. Because it was growing exponentially. It was a huge base, and there were lots of visitors coming through, lots of VIPs, members of Congress, the House, the Senate, generals, and lots of VIPs. So I don't have the names of these folks, but these are the Grand Ole Opry group, and in their costumes. They didn't make it with them to the USO show, but they went on and gave a nice performance.
Cool.
Then this is Bob Hope over here. That's Carol Baker next to him. I think the blonde here was Miss USA. This is a USO show, and this was what it looked like for the Bob Hope show too. They set up a little stage, and I had a photographer.
Yeah, incredible.
And so he was getting pictures of VIPs that were coming through. These are some generals who were.
What's up with the 9 rules?
That was something from that they handed out, I guess, to all the soldiers. I don't remember this at all until I was going through my stuff and just seeing them. And it's basically to be nice to the local folks and treat them like you would want to be treated. I don't remember these folks in particular, but I do remember that's the colonel who is the head of the Cam Ranh logistics area.
The guy in the middle?
Yeah, well, I was there. And this is they opened the commissary. That's the same colonel welcoming 4 nurses. They had a hooch set up. They built put barbed wire around it to keep them safe. I think these are a couple of senators who were here for a briefing, and that's me in the background here, and I was taking them around. This is Senator Symington from Missouri, who is, I think, a leader on the Armed Services or Foreign Affairs.
One more time.
Sure.
Great.
Right here. And here he is again. So we'd set up these soldiers from Missouri for him to meet. I think this is earlier from an over-the-shore operation at Fort Story. That's me over here on the right. And this is from basic training, I think, at Transportation Officers Basic Course. Some of the activities that we were involved in. So I remember going, there was a Vietnamese orphanage nearby, and we had sent some soldiers went up to help with them. And this is an article by Associated Press reporter. I used to read him before I went there, so I recognized his name. And I ran into him. I think I was in Nha Trang, and he was sitting next to me at a restaurant, and he looked like he was a reporter, and I asked him if he was, and he said who he was, and he started asking me questions about Cam Ranh Bay. So I was telling him about the base that was being built, and I guess he came down there, and that was before I was the I got the assignment to be the public information officer, that he wrote an article about Cam Ranh, and he includes some quotes from me in the article. And my mom saw them back in Seattle because it was syndicated all over the country. And my mom sent it to me. When Westmoreland came to Cam Ranh Bay, there's a picture of him in the article here. This is General Westmoreland at Cam Ranh Bay. And I think I'm over here in this picture. My mom says she recognized me because I was with the person who did that story. When I came back, I went to graduate school, and I did a thesis on the Vietnam war correspondence. So it's my tome.
Wow. Okay. That's pretty incredible.
These are the extent of my ribbons here. And this is the Transportation Corps logo. And this is my last uniform that I had.
Oh, wow.
It's with...
That still fits.
I haven't put it on. As a first lieutenant, you start as a second lieutenant, and then after about a year and a half or so, you get up to the first. So on the right where I've been was my Mac V, and at the time, my last assignment was in the Army Reserves, 6th Army. I was in California. One of the things I did while I was a public information officer, I took a lot of reporters around, including broadcast reporters. And one of the things I did was I went to the 5 o'clock Follies, that's what they were called. It was the daily press briefing by the military of what was happening throughout the country. And I write about this in my thesis as well. Nobody trusted anybody. The journalists were getting kind of a rose-colored picture from the daily press briefings, and they're just pummeling the briefer with questions, and a lot of them, they were sometimes evasive in the answers, and then the reporters would go out on missions and see things weren't quite the way that they were talked about, and it was just fascinating to be there, fly on the wall in that setup. After I finished the PIO stint, I went back to the boat platoon. I was pointing out Colonel Morrison to you, who's the commander of the headquarters. There's an entrepreneur coming by. He had a shipload of San Miguel beer, literally 5-hatch ship filled with San Miguel beer. And he was going up and down the coast selling it to the military. Colonel Morrison bought a hatch worth of beer. Well, that would be probably a room this size, stacked about 7-8 feet high of beer, San Miguel beer. And so he bought it for the commissary there's a NCO club. This was later on now, and for the officers club, and so it was just, there was no place to put it, and so he just had it out in this open area on the sand. Pretty soon the pile started dwindling down. There are a lot of soldiers doing low crawls to where the beer was, and even every tent had boxes of beer, and some of the men, all of a sudden in our officers' tent, there were about 5 cases of beer piled up for us. I guess that was to buy us off, which worked. One of the things our boats did was we unloaded. There's a refrigerator bar, a barge that was brought into Cam Ranh Bay. So, and it had all sorts of fresh foods. Later, after several months of the B rations, they started selling. They started giving us, fresh foods that were from this refrigerator barge. Well, as the guys were bringing this stuff ashore, we had first call on everything. And once that was set up, every single night, every soldier in the 1097th boat platoon could have a T-bone steak if they wanted one, because the mess sergeant took a 55-gallon oil drum, cut it in half the long way, made it into a barbecue. We got charcoal off the local economy, and they got a grill, and there were barbecued T-bone steaks every single night for the troops. So that was special privileges of being in the Transportation Corps. So 'cause I don't know if you know the motto of the Transportation Corps. It's you call, we haul, that's all.